All right, I'm really excited now to bring on our guest, Elle Morrill. Hi, Elle. Let's just make sure your mic's working.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. So let me say a little to introduce you, and then my hope is that our conversation will give people a much better understanding of who you are and your story and just some of the things that are central to your path in life so far. So I put here on the screen, and I'll remove this slide in a moment, but you have at least three dimensions to your career so far. You're a founder of companies, you've worked in companies, you've been an executive coach, and you're an investor, and that's just scratching the surface. So I would like to do is to talk about your path, how you got here. So let's start with just your business career, and then we'll dive in a bit more into how you became aware of Ayn Rand's philosophy, what it meant to you, what it means to you now in your professional life. So I want to start with something that I found fascinating when I read this. So I tend to read a lot about the guests that we bring on, and one of the things I read is an interview you did with Y Combinator, and I hope I'm describing this accurately. But Y Combinator is an accelerator, I think, or an incubator for startup companies, and we'll talk about that maybe later on in the conversation. But you were interviewed more than 10 years ago, I think, at this time. Anyway, so one of the things you said, I'm going to read back your own words. I hope this isn't, I hope this is okay with you. I'm going to quote you to yourself. Quote, "I've always been racing to go faster in life." And that just resonated with me really powerfully. I remember moments where that was true for me, and I know people like that. And so one of the things that struck me is from a very early age, you've had a lot of different jobs, a lot of work experience, and you're really like going faster, like really racing. So tell us a bit about um, what kind of work did you do? What drove you to do it? And what sort of environment did you have? Was this something like your parents told you, you've got to get a job on Saturdays, otherwise there's no allowance? Or what was the driving factor here for you to be involved in work so early and like this passion to move faster?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for quoting that. I haven't read that in a long time. Now I want to go back to it. Well, let's see. So I'm thinking about like what it was the very first job for money, because I think it really is a big crossover when you get real money as opposed to just like trading something. I think it was the first trading was like for horseback riding lessons. I always like wanted to do all these adventurous things. I think the first job for money was like as a receptionist answering the phone at the tennis club where I played tennis. So I think a lot of things I wanted to do early on were just how do I enable the activities that I want to do in life? My parents were, kind of well off, but my dad was an entrepreneur, so money was a big point of drama in our household. So it was like, well, one way to reduce the drama is just provide my own money and, pay for my own activities. And this didn't always work out, like at 14, I couldn't legally drive. So I was like driving to the horse stables in my parents' old car in a small town. So, nobody cares, right? Um, but, and then you get pulled over at 14 and they're like, what are you doing? Like, talk my way out of that. So I think a lot of it is early on just wanting to do things and seeing money as an enabler for that. And then starting to figure out like, oh, there's jobs that people get. And then there's all the other things that need to happen in the world. I had like all these little businesses. So I have had a business where I would help people. This is like in the late 90s. And I lived on an island. So I was helping older people figure out how to talk to their internet service provider,
Mhm.
which is basically just sitting on hold with someone and then turning computers on and off again. But this is frustrating, right? So just like, wow, people will pay you to do things they don't want to do. So that was another insight. So first was like, oh, I want to get paid to enable my life. And then, oh, I like want to help people. And it's pretty cool that I can help people. And like, it's just sort of this very like natural path of learning to work. My parents definitely thought I should have gone to college, and I did end up doing that. Um, they were first generation college graduates on both sides, both families. But our conversation a lot of the time at the like dining room table was, what will you do when you grow up? And my answer changed all the time. So I'm not really surprised that I had all these different jobs looking back.
So when you say you grew up on an island, and what was the environment like? Was there sort of a culture at your high school about everyone goes to college, everyone's trying to get the best college possible, Ivy League, etc.? Was it that kind of environment?
Yeah, so everyone went to college pretty much, very affluent community. So I think it was not crazy to think you would go to an Ivy League school there. Being smart was really valued, which I think was very fortunate. So like um, being on that track was seen as very high status. So even if you were not on that track, being smart was sort of natural. So you didn't get teased for being nerdy or reading a lot. We had this summer reading competition. I think it was like 20 or 30 books that I worked very hard to try to win. I don't think I ever won it, but it was like a kind of place where like that's what kids did for the summer.
So you didn't go to college, and why is that? And what did you do at that age? So and this is if I understand correctly, you have a string of jobs that you've worked at this point through high school even, and you finished high school early because you decided it's not, you want to just get faster through what you're doing.
Yeah, so I had some disagreements with my parents about, how I should live my life as a teenager, which I think is pretty common. But, not every teenager actually figures out how to make enough money to move out their senior year of high school. So I did do that, and I continued working for my dad. So he was running a wealth management and 401k advising consulting business. So he had also kind of gone a different direction early in his career. So he was a bit of a role model to me, and I was working for him, just automating basically spreadsheet monkey things, but sort of ending up coding because that was the natural path. You start working with spreadsheets and then macros, and you want it to go faster. And then eventually you're like, well, I'll just Google for this. And, it's kind of walking down that natural path again, just very much just try things out, mess around and find out. I won't swear on this, but everybody knows that that's a great way of living life. So I didn't go to college. I went to community college briefly, which if anything is like, it's the worst way to decide to experience college because it's like a very different academic environment. A lot of people are not there, for the same reasons that I would have gone. But I was honestly a total snob. I was like, if I'm not going to a top 10 Ivy, what's the point of doing this? I should just keep working. Looking back, I don't know what I think of that, but that was definitely my mindset at the time. I think also, I was in a really rebellious phase, maybe even more rebellious. I'd moved out. Was in a band. I had black hair. Had a boyfriend in a band, so it's just like, this is such a great time in life. Why would I go sit in school some more? Like, it just seemed like the least appetizing thing to me. And I was like, and I know how to make money. Like literally I could start from zero at any point, and I'm just willing at that point, to work hard and have a lot of energy. So that's the real answer. I think I used to dress that up more, but that's the truth.
Okay, so let's now skip to a really intense period in your career early on, and I will shuttle back and forth a bit here because one of the things I read about is you developed skills in coding, and then you joined. It wasn't your first job, but you were one of the first employees, if not the first employee, of a company called Twilio. And tell us about how your career goes from Twilio to say 10 years ago.
Yeah. Man, that's such an intense part of life. So I was joining Twilio at 23 years old as the first employee. So it was a company founded by 3 engineers, and they hired me to do support tickets and make explainer videos for developers about how to use their platform. So, really scrappy company. I think the first day that I went to work for them, I walked into the coffee shop. We didn't have an office. I walked into the coffee shop and they were like, oh, we just raised money. We need you to get us a story in TechCrunch. And I was like, I don't think you just like pick those from the tree they grow on. So I had to figure that out. So most of my experience at Twilio was about marketing developer tools. And we built a campaign around the idea of doers as heroes. So really, you can already see objectivism influencing the way I approach that. But yeah, just taking these makers and making them heroes, being a platform that they could get more attention for their creations and more appreciation for what they were building. So that also brought me deeper into the Silicon Valley tech community. And I was living in Seattle, but moved to San Francisco during that time. So that's a huge deal. Moving to San Francisco completely changed my life. And I was really at Twilio for a fairly short time. I think it was maybe 3 years in all, but it feels like a decade because when you go from 3 founders and an employee to, I think I was maybe out of the door right around 150 people, but the doubling there, it's just like, you can't even really contain in your mind all those relationships. And so I did feel like I lived a lot of time, and also it demystified startups to me. So I left Twilio, had a couple side projects. I applied to Y Combinator kind of on a whim.
Let me pause you there before we get to Y Combinator. I want to tell me a bit more about what is the product in layman's terms, if it's necessary. what is the product that Twilio was developing? And also, just for the context of people who maybe not have heard of TechCrunch, what is what is TechCrunch to the technology industry?
Sure. I mean, then even maybe more than now, but then it was kind of the industry rag, the publication that you want to get mentioned in, that's going to bring you users, it's going to bring you investors, employees, attention, everything that you would want for your fledgling company. That's where you want to be getting attention for the company. As far as the company's product, so we started out building developer tools for software engineers to make and receive telephone calls, which sounds so simple, but then you realize the only app that you have on an old school phone pretty much is voicemail. So we were making it programmable and smart. Things like using code to navigate phone trees. Pretty much any like calling system you use today is using one of these tools. We were just very early, and then moved to text messaging and VoIP and video messaging. And now the company has bought many other companies. It's kind of an entire communication suite, but it really started with taking phone calls in the physical world, right? So you do these demos on stage, you write a little code, and then a phone rings. It blows people's minds.
Mm.
And when I saw that, I felt like, wow, this is one of those things that to me is really cool, and to the rest of the world is sort of unsexy. And I began to find my personal niche for like, how do you explain these things to normal people? How do you get people excited about what can be built and kind of excited about the future they can't imagine yet? And I think today that feels a lot more mainstream, but in 2009, I think the culture of tech's relationship to the public was different. So I feel like I really was part of the beginning of just tech going a lot more mainstream, and just the average person being like, well, what can I build? So it was a really, really exciting time to be starting out in startups.
And just to finish, just put a punctuation mark on your time at Twilio. So it gets to the point where it's a 150 person company plus, and when you leave it, so what was your role by the time you left? So you started off as go do this stuff for us and get us this extraordinary article that's hard to do. What did you do by the time you were leaving?
My title was director of marketing. Support team had been handed off. I had moved to London for a while and opened our office there and hired a GM for Europe. So it's kind of, marketing was the core thing. I had got 18 direct reports when I left, but kind of touched a lot of different parts of the business side of the company. The goal was really, how do we make it so the founders and the early engineers can just write code as long as possible? So anything I needed to do to enable that, I was going to do. And I think the way we picked my title, remember, I'm like 23, I almost said 13, I felt like 23 when I joined this company. What does a director title mean to a 23-year-old? Nothing, right? It's just like, well, what are we going to call you? Well, I need to be able to get into the rooms where the decisions happen and like call on these customers. So just call me a director. It's the same thing. It's like, just mess around and figure it out as we go. And so I had just at the very end, I think, begun to taste what it might look like to be an executive. And I was like, okay, well, we're going to do this someday, but not yet. And that's kind of how the next thing happened.
So I want to come to Y Combinator in that phase of it, but let's just step back a second, because you already brought out the ways in which Objectivism was shaping your perspective on making these developers heroes and sort of part of how to bring people to the product. Tell us a bit about how you first encountered Ayn Rand. It sounds like it happened before this already. So what was the story there?
Yeah, so I was very lucky. My parents had, I think, both The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged like on the bookshelf at home, but they were kind of their big books. And so, 15-year-old me, I think I had like maybe picked them up and they were in my bedroom and I never read them. And then I was my senior in high school, and I think a friend made fun of someone for being a moocher. I don't remember. And somehow it was only funny in retrospect. Anyway, he recommended that I read Atlas Shrugged. And I think that's like a really great age, 18. You're trying to figure out who you are. You're right on the edge of adulthood. And I found Dagny's character just really compelling. I mean, I think it's kind of mind-blowing how hard it seems to be to find female protagonists. Like, woke people are always complaining that we don't have enough representation. And here's this amazing representation. So that kind of took me down the path. I can't believe in retrospect that I read that whole book first before, learning about the rest of Objectivism. But yeah, I read Atlas Shrugged, and then I was reading other philosophy books. My boyfriend at the time was also kind of searching, I think, for kind of what is the guiding light going to be for two atheists, like what are we going to do with our lives? And I was like, I'll just go to an objectivist conference because that's what I do, right? I'm like, these people should be, happy, successful. I should be able to learn from them. They should be able to communicate how these values impacted their life. Just go to a conference. This seems like a very efficient way to figure out if these are good ideas or not. And so I went to the Wintergreen conference in 2004, which is I guess it's the summer after the 1 year I spent kind of in community college. And I just kind of, that's how I started. And then I went that. So what was interesting was I hadn't read any nonfiction. I was not going to spend much more time. I was like, I'm going to go to these lectures and meet these people. And if they seem great, then I will invest, in this huge body of writing and work that this person at Ayn Rand, I don't think I said her name right until I went to the conference, so just jumped in really.
Tell me a bit more about what it meant to you to encounter a character like Dagny and just to live in that universe a while. Just because I know I've talked to a lot of people over the years, and it's always a unique experience. I'd love to hear how it mattered to you at the time.
Oh man, I think it was the beginning of maybe deprogramming some of my ideas about femininity a little bit. Like, this character is such a doer. And I was such a doer. And sometimes I felt like a bit of a weirdo, So then to see this character who's obviously like going through life, making things happen, and like in every sense, she's glamorous and she's accomplishing things. It's like very compelling. I think it really speaks to the, time and history that book is written too. You think it's so different growing up in the 90s versus reading a book written in the 50s, but it's not really that different. You're only maybe 1 or 2 generations away from whatever the ideal was. So she's obviously writing a character who's even more out of place. So I just felt like, oh, if this person and I had been like alive at the same time, we'd probably be friends, was the way I felt. I also was fascinated by the way she related to the men in her life. And kind of beginning to figure out for myself, what does admiration look like? How does that work? Her dynamic with her brother is very different from her dynamic with Francisco, but that's also very different from these men she meets as an adult. So there were just a lot of things that I think really tied to themes that were just personally very meaningful at that point in my life. And also just the idea that it wasn't a futile quest for me to be looking for ideas. It was like clear that ideas were the part of the fuel for how things were going to turn out for these characters. And I was already searching, but sometimes I felt like everyone else is telling me it doesn't matter. There's like a lot of nihilism. I didn't know how to name any of those things, but I could feel people were like, why do you read all these books? Like, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And I felt like, honestly, the first time I read Atlas Shrugged, I don't think I thought of it as philosophy. I was really just focused on these people. Like, what moves them? How are they motivated? How do their lives unfold? How's my life going to unfold? And so it made me more curious, not less, about my life and how ideas would be part of that.
Let's weave these two strands together. So tell us a bit now. Let's switch back to you go to this conference, you find this really resonant experience with Atlas Shrugged, and then you're at the end of the Twilio experience, you decide to go to Y Combinator. So let's just say, let's explain to people what Y Combinator is, just as a context setting, and then let's jump into what did you do, what did you pitch them, what was that like?
Yeah, so Y Combinator is a startup accelerator program. It was started in Boston in 2005, and by the time I participated in 2012, it had become more of an institution. They moved to the Bay Area, and some number of startups would be accepted to the program. It's like a 10-week intensive program where you work on launching your startup. You take some funding. You, most importantly, become part of a community where you meet with other founders. This is a really big deal because a lot of people join this program from other places, not the Bay Area. And this might be the first time that they're surrounded by other people like them. And so you have Tuesday night dinner every week, where you all get together and compare notes on how much progress you're making. So there's like a little bit of gentle rivalry going on. And then at the end, there's a demo day presentation, which is a really great way to raise money and get visibility. And it just creates a socially acceptable reason to tell everybody to leave you alone for 10 weeks while you work as hard as possible on your startup, and then have this kind of celebration and milestone at the end. This often is stereotyped as being, people who are a couple years out of college, but the truth is the age range is very wide in terms of founders. People are founding companies throughout their entire lifetime. So you meet just an incredible combination of people you probably would never meet otherwise. And yeah, where would you like me to take it from there?
Yeah, so that's what Y Combinator is. I don't know what the stats are, but it sounds like it's going to be challenging to get accepted. So what did you pitch them? What was your concept at the time that you were really passionate to build?
Yeah, so as far as the stats, I think the acceptance rate is like lower than the acceptance rate of Stanford, but maybe not quite as much demand. But I pitched them this idea I had been working on the side called Referrally, which was like a universal link shortener for affiliate links. So I was noticing that on Twitter, which was still pretty early days, there were a lot of people sharing product links. We ran like a sample crawl and we found it was like billions of unmonetized product links per month. And we just thought it would be really great if people didn't have to sign up for affiliate programs and could just, take any product across the entire internet and then generate a link that would actually get them paid. So pitched that as a solo founder, had like a very basic working prototype. Solo founders don't usually get into Y Combinator. But I got in. So then I had to decide to go. I tried to negotiate, for giving up less ownership. And they were like, people don't really do that.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, I have to think about it. They're like, people don't really do that. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I was just trying to figure out, after Twilio, what I was going to do with myself. So I kind of figured I should probably do it. So I did.
Mm-hmm. Now, I read a bit about this, and it sounded like and maybe this is a common thing with startups, is that there's a pivot at some point. You realize something about the market, or you realize something about the product, and and our CEO is a founder, and so he often talks to us about product market fit, and I'm starting to understand what that means a bit more, talking to various people and the way he's explaining it. So tell us a bit about what that journey is like, because I know that as part of skipping forward a bit now, is that part of what you do now is you engage with other executives and other founders and you help coach them. So tell us a bit about what was the journey like, but was it true that there was this opportunity? How did you react to the market? Where did things go with that product?
Yeah, so there was some opportunity. There was definitely interest in what we're building. I think now if you go use Instagram in particular, you'll see there are short links for products. So like this did end up happening. I think in our case, we really struggled to get people to use this who were creating real content. And so like the journey of product market fit is you go out and you're trying to find users, but you also have kind of an ideal user in mind that you need to find enough of those users in particular to make the business work. We ended up finding a lot of people who'd been kicked off of all the other affiliate platforms, which was not our ideal user. So through this trial and error process of trying to figure out, how do we find these people? How do we get them to take the actions we want? How do we change our product to make that easier? In this case, we pretty much decided within a year that, we could do this, but the margin was very low and it would be very difficult to acquire the users that we wanted. I mean, that's just one variant on this overall product market fit finding adventure that you go on. That was specific to kind of like a consumer metamediary business model, but like every business model kind of has its own product market fit journey. I'm on a different one with my current company now. But yeah, there's just a lot of hypothesis, test, reflect, repeat. I mean, you're really applying the scientific method. And like to the extent that you can do that faithfully, quickly, clearly, you can make a lot of progress. But if you don't have that mental clarity, you can just kind of wallow over in, a lot of startups just kind of die for lack of mental clarity around what are we trying to actually do here. So we tried to keep it clear and quick. And that's part of how we were able to pivot so much more quickly than we might have otherwise. We could have spent another couple of years on that problem, but we didn't, which is great. Time is precious.
What did you pivot to? What did it become?
So meanwhile, I had started investing, and one of my portfolio companies told me a story where they had gone to pitch a investor, and the investor basically revealed after 5 or 6 time-wasting meetings that they didn't actually have money to invest. So I wrote a blog post about this, and I was like, I bet there's a lot of other investors like this. How would I use data to figure this out? And it turns out, VC funds announce when they raise new money. So you can basically just build an exception report or a timing report. So I ended up building a company called Mattermark. It started out with kind of a incendiary blog post where I named all the firms that hadn't raised in a while to kind of warn founders that maybe they didn't want to waste their time. And I got, the phone calls that are like, you're never going to work in this town again. And I knew I had something. It's like, that is definitely how you know you have something. And I definitely, I'm still working in this town. But it was just the difference of what that feels like. People are trying to pull this product out of my hands, hey, Ellie, will you send us this spreadsheet? Can we get access early? Like, it was just completely different from the startup before. So in a way, we had product market fit. We barely had a product. The blog post was the product. So that was kind of like an interesting payoff. That wasn't what I was expecting, but we pivoted and built a whole data-driven kind of private company, Bloomberg, based on that change.
So I think you called it in other contexts like Bloomberg for startup investors. Is that
Yes.
a good summary? Yeah. I want to ask you just to take a sidebar on this. So I tried to read a lot of these blog posts that I found on your site. For anyone who's interested to learn more about Ellie, just go read some of these things. And I really appreciate, you're a really strong writer, and I didn't see that side of you just from other things online. So it was enjoyable to read them. But then I read one of these that you mentioned some of the experience you had of, you said people called you up and said you're never going to work in this town, but you also got a different kind of reaction. So one of these was, I think, Mark Andreessen, who's a really famous investor. He was involved in Netscape, and now he's part of Horowitz, Andreessen Horowitz. I forget which way around that is, but he's a very big deal. He's active on Twitter. Why did he reach out to you? And was this in the phase where you really just had the blog post, or did you already have a product? What was the experience like?
Yeah, I think he reached out and just told me I was right.
What
It
were
was
you right
so
about?
satisfying. I think it was about a different blog post actually.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I kept writing, more things about using data to draw insights about the market. He reached out and told me, to keep going. And then later, when we needed money because we were pivoted but not really like funded for the new thing, I reached out to him and asked him for money. I just asked him for like $50,000. I didn't ask him for like, he's a billionaire, but I was like, hey, I just need this much, I was trying to do this thing. And, he said yes. And I think there's a very powerful call and response between, knowing that you're creating value and then, getting paid for the value or for the future thing that you're going to create. For me, the biggest thing about that is that it reminds you that no one's too big of a deal to reach out to. Like, isn't it a bummer that so many of the people we'd like to reach out to are dead? Like, anyone who's alive is fair game. Like, these people in the world are also looking for exciting things. They're looking for a future they want to be part of. They're trying to make things happen. And I think I was already fairly fearless, but it just took me to a whole nother level of like, yeah, if there's people that I admire that I want to work with, I should probably try to talk to them. What's the worst? Maybe they say no, but I think we're all hungry to see things that we want to have exist in the world be successful. So it was just a good reminder. And I've been reading him for a long time, so it kind of made me think, who else have I been reading a long time that I should try to meet in real life?
I love to hear more about that. I wanted to hit some of the other milestones in your career, and I want to understand a bit how they developed. So Mattermark is a company that is either, I forget, it was acquired or you exited in some way, but you're not part of Mattermark anymore. It's moved into another corporation. Tell us a bit about some of the other companies, and in reading about you, I saw that, or I think you told me that it was, over your career, you've raised venture capital, and I think you said it was about 30 million in total. And tell us what you told us about raising money for Mark Andreessen. It was very modest for him. What is it like raising that much money? What does it look like to be in a room, and how do you engage with people? Just open the door for us on that. It would be really interesting.
I'm not sure I've had a conventional path with this, but fundamentally, there's a lot of money out there. Like, in the big picture, $30 million, it sounds like so much to each of us, but like, there's so much money looking for return out there. And so I think what it feels like being in a room at first is terrifying, because you feel like you're asking for this huge thing. I need $1 million to start this company, or I need 5 million to continue it, or 20 million, or whatever. But then I think there's this, for me, a bit of a switch that's flipped, which is, what is the currency of the person that I'm talking to? what do they want? It's not money. Money is not the same to everyone. The number doesn't mean the same. It didn't come from the same place. It doesn't have the same vision behind it. Like, it's actually amazingly neutral, right? Like, it's given meaning by people. So figuring out what motivates people is really the heart of raising money. It's the heart of getting people to pay you for products too. So in the beginning, I was just trying to run the playbook. With Referrally, it was like people had written on the internet, here's how you do this thing. But then, leaving Twilio, I discovered that people were watching me. And so people wanted to give our startup money when Paul Graham at Y Combinator was like, hey, don't take money. You shouldn't take money during Y Combinator. Don't be distracted. So tried really hard not to take money, but it was pretty much impossible. I had like people beating down the door. And I was like, I had never been like the hot girl. Like, I didn't know what to do in that situation. So, we ended up taking money on really great terms because we were like a hot idea, but the startup wasn't a good idea. It didn't work. So very quickly started to realize like, oh, it's hard to be a good investor. I mean, I already knew that, but I didn't know it in the venture context, right? They were investing in me, in kind of the hotness of the moment, but we pivoted that idea. But then that was a huge VC firm, and I watched them stick by me and put more money into the next thing. And I started realizing, oh, they're investing in me. And they're investing in my vision, and they're investing in the trust that we've built because I'm a good communicator. So I been walking down this path of like, what is really happening in these deals? It's one thing to be a big VC firm. So that firm who tracked us down was NEA, which is the largest venture firm in the world. When someone writes you a personal check for $20,000, that's a really big deal too. Says $20,000 to them is the Hawaii vacation they're not going on with their wife and kids. And that's a big deal. So they're investing in a world that they want to see, or they're investing in me, or they're investing in someone else on my team who picked me. And through that, there's like transferred trust that they're like willing to bet on. So I could give a more pat answer, but I think it's really important. I raised our Series A and Series B for Mattermark over email from Brad Feld, because Brad and I have a very shared vision of the world, and we love a certain set of sci-fi, and we just are able to talk to each other in this extremely clean, clear way. And that's a once in a lifetime thing. Unfortunately, didn't raise from Brad for this new company, but there was like the feeling of, oh, it's also about values alignment. When I sat down with Brad, we were kind of in a weird place with Mattermark, and we didn't want to just raise from anyone because we were really worried about how investors might bias the product, because it happened to be a product for like inside the industry. So we picked a very small number of investors, and we went out to raise, and we failed. We picked 6 investors, and they all said no. And we thought, well, maybe we shouldn't do this. Like, these are the 6 best. We want these 6, and one of them was Brad. And then went back to him many times, maybe 4 times. And then eventually he said yes. So I don't know. I think the story kind of evolved with the company, and I had to keep telling the story and telling the journey and bringing people along. Sort of part of my writing is also bringing people along so they understand like what is going on up here. You can't assume people can just figure it out from a single meeting. So it's a very vulnerable thing, but I think both ways. When you have a big company like a VC firm, I think it's a little less vulnerable feeling, but at the end of the day, all those partners have to get a track record going, and that's how they're going to get paid. So it's really a big deal. And then now with this new company, I ended up raising from all previous investors and hiring all previous employees. So now I'm having that experience of being like mid-career and having a kind of set of people I choose from. So it's really a study in what motivates people. And I don't think it's ever going to end. I think the next time I do it, it's different. It's very important to remember that money by itself doesn't it's very, very powerful, but it also, the meaning piece is really personal. And I feel like I've never lost track of that. And that's part of how I can really partner with people to, do this again, even though like my last startup economically wasn't a great outcome, but getting those same people to work with me again, I think is a testament to how this really works.
I want to go back and forth a little bit more on so you're raising money, you're on another company now, and you're learning a lot all the way through. And I want to ask you a bit about what is it like, because I imagine there's just a lot of learning about how to manage a company, how to manage people, how to manage at a different scale or a different phase of the development. And along the way, I expect that there are all kinds of challenges, moral challenges, what kind of people deal with. What are some of the ways that you found, if you can share with us, that your exposure to objectivism or some of the inspiration you got from reading Ayn Rand, how did that come into some of your thinking? And you mentioned earlier, and I've heard this from at least one other founder and entrepreneur, this sort of rigorous application of a scientific method. It's like really committed to the facts. You don't let anything go above the facts. And if you do, then you're really harming yourself. And that kind of commitment to reality, which I think, I mean, Ayn Rand celebrates it, and successful people build on it. I'm just curious about how any of that filters into your approach then, now, and sort of reflections on that.
Yeah. Well, I'll connect this to someone in the comments or in the chat was saying, oh, 33 mid-career. Like, sad to say I'm 38 now. I think I'm legit mid-career. But I think one way that it's really fit in with the mid-career comment is when I got to hire my own people and build my own base of investors and control the environment, it was a lot easier to make sure that I was bringing aboard a bunch of folks who are committed to reality. And I got to do that when I started my own companies. But I also went and worked for GitLab before they went public. Twilio eventually went public. And in those companies, I didn't have complete control over the yes, no decision. So I think the first part for me was noticing what happens when you don't adhere to reality. That's a really good teacher. So before, I can't say that I was like, oh, I just read Atlas Shrugged and just knew exactly what to do. You start seeing things not work out and you start questioning what happened there and there and there. And you have all these examples. And you see people just kind of blanking out or hoping that like magically something's going to happen and they don't want to actually connect the dots. And I think for me, a huge goal of mine is, how do I make other people that I work with successful? Because I'm going to build a much bigger company this time. I'm going to need to hire a lot more people. You can't just default expect everybody's going to know how to use reality to get things done. So like, if you can't expect that, then what do? Teach them. So for me, a huge part has been teaching. And I think that's been something that was more accessible to me when I wasn't the CEO, because the power dynamic of being CEO makes that tricky. But being an executive at GitLab was probably the most magical for me, because it was kind of an interesting spot. I had sold Mattermark, Twilio had IPO'd. I was like kind of trying to figure out if I was retiring or not. And then I was like, what is my motivation right now? Because honestly, it wasn't money. It just wasn't. I was just like, I should probably keep working so I don't like let the sword get rusty. I don't know. So I started focusing on just like, well, what's going on for these other people? Why is it hard for them? Why do they struggle? And that's when I got into coaching. That's when I did coaching training, because I realized I need new skills. I need to ask better questions. I need to be able to sit with people who I don't agree with longer. I need to be more curious. There's a whole other set of skills that I don't have. And maybe I'll just pause there, but I think that the heart of it is like switching to the teacher mindset, and not making too many assumptions like, oh, this person, because they can't see reality, that they're bad, but more just maybe nobody's shown them how great this is yet.
Yeah, that reminds me of just the power of, I guess there's a couple of things I reflect on in hearing what you're saying. One is just the learning about the importance of facts and like really being committed to reality and the consequences of that. And people, I think, often will, it's not a controversial thing for most people, but the reality of actually being that committed is controversial. They were not as comfortable with that. And I think that's one of the powerful things I take from Ayn Rand, is this commitment to reality, the aspiration and the ability to be objective, and helping people do that. And the other thing that I'm just hearing in what you're saying, I want to put in words, is this idea of growth. And the way you put it, I love that you came to the realization, I need new skills. And this is someone who's built a bunch of companies, grown in a company and risen really, and still the view you came to was, I need new skills. And that kind of self-awareness and the valuing of new knowledge, I think that's just so powerful. And it's obviously served you really well. I want to talk a bit about some of what you're saying in terms of dealing with people that you don't agree with, and how do you get them to agreement? And just my role's changed significantly in the last few years, and I'm involved in managing people more, and it's an interesting challenge, and I'm always interested in how people navigate it in their own context. Maybe you can share a bit with us how you bring that experience you've had in coaching to your role now. And because one of the things we haven't said yet, and I think it's important, is the company that you're involved with now, I think just last week you announced you stepped into the CEO position, not only so you're a co-founder or a founder. Tell us a bit about what you've learned about managing, and then what you're doing now in terms of the CEO position, because it sounds like this is the level of control that you really prefer to have, like the say over the whole direction. So share with us about that.
Sure. Well, first I have to share my big breakthrough in managing people, and when we don't agree. It's kind of a two-part for me. One is I commit to being an amazing thought partner. So I will talk to someone about the path they want to take, what they want to do, ask questions, like make it psychologically safe to explore like the whole solution space. But the hard thing I've had to learn is that sometimes you have to let things fall apart. People have to learn through actually making mistakes. And that can be really scary when you're like, well, if they make a mistake, it could like really hurt this company. But like, if you think they're going to hurt the company over and over again, you probably shouldn't have them there at all. But if you think they could make a mistake and they could learn, and like, I think part of our job as leaders is to create environments that are good containers for growth for other people. And sometimes that has to come from, okay, we talked it through. You want to do this thing. I don't agree, but I'm going to disagree and commit as long as you commit to talking to me about whatever happens. And we'll course correct from there. We still have goals for the company. It's still possible there are going to be, negative consequences, but the first step for most people is to take on the responsibility for being wrong. When we debate online, there's no consequences for just saying stuff. So it can feel like, oh, we can't get any traction. But the good thing about companies is there's scorekeeping usually. There's goals and you hit them or you don't. I think especially if you can find people who are really early in their career and let them have like a real big mistake early. So they have to go through the entire process of taking that apart when their job is not, they're not a VP yet, right? They're like a sales rep, and like, it's going to be okay. They're not going to kill the company. So it's just the sooner you can have a small crisis together, the faster you can learn from that. That was hard for me. Now I love it. It's funny with startups, I love the chaos, but in managing, part of what you're being paid to do is to de-risk things. So I was kind of seen as a bit of a renegade sometimes, So you have to be the shit umbrella. Sorry, that's not the most ladylike language, but that's what it is. You have to be that person who says like, okay, I'm going to make it safe for you to hit the walls, but I'll explain what we're doing, And so I think there's also building the bigger narrative of like, what kind of leader are you? What kind of team are you going to produce? What kind of results are you going to produce? So that's kind of the big takeaway is like, reality is going to bring justice. You don't have to like preemptively like wield a big sword and like try to convince everybody. I default think people are smart enough to learn these lessons. I think you have to make it safe to learn the lessons psychologically. Like they need a partner so that someone else can say, hey, I saw that. Did you see that? Like we see the same thing. Like, how do we understand this thing? How do we take it apart? And that requires slowing down enough to do all that. So managing is honestly way more work than being a startup founder in some ways, because like it's a different kind of work.
Yeah.
As far as what I'm doing now, you said something interesting. You said this seems to be the amount of control that you prefer. To be totally honest, I don't know about that statement. I think I prefer the least possible control that I can have to get the thing I want. So in this case with my co-founder, he's a first-time CEO. He's still with me in this company. We just switched. I was CTO and he's CEO, and now we're going to swap. And he was CEO for 2.5 years. And then we came to kind of the conclusion that, hey, to get product market fit and get where we need to go on the right timeline, we've tried it this way. We got some things done, but it's not going fast enough. So we need to switch gears. I think it's very context specific. And that's, I think, a big part of what collaboration is. Kind of going back to what I was saying about investing. It's the same deal. It's like, who are these particular people? How are they motivated? Like treating each person like an individual, not just, a butt in a seat with a title. There's just a lot of different flavors of the same title, but you pretty much realize that these titles, they don't mean anything. I mean, I had a BS title at the beginning of my career, and I can never unsee that, like, you can just give people titles. But what you can't do is you can't replace their unique ability to solve problems. And like over time, you know, the person that I started this company with, Jonathan, we met because he was a customer of Twilio. So we've known each other 15 years. And I've watched him operate in a bunch of different environments. And so I know that the person that I get to work with every day is the right person. And like what his title is, it kind of doesn't matter. That's kind of the secret, you know, like CEO, so glamorous. I don't know. Like, I mean, I could be the janitor and I could make $1 billion. I'm so down for that. But it just doesn't seem to usually work out that way.
Yeah.
I have been a janitor, by the way, but yeah.
I was gonna say we didn't cover all the different jobs you had when you were in your teens, but what that is one of them, and so was stable shoveling horses and so on.
Yes.
So,
and I also clean the bathrooms at McDonald's. So
yeah.
I am totally all for like doing the grimy, gritty job that no one else wants to do if that's what'll get you there. What I have found is that once you sit in a position of power and then you don't like identify with it too much, people tend to want to keep putting you in that position because they know you're not going to like hold on to it for the wrong reasons. I'm pretty sure this one I'll get product market fit and then we'll reassess. You know, I don't know that I'll be CEO of this company forever. And I think my last company, I would never have said these words, but now I'm like, okay, you know, if I'm still the best person to run it, great. But I would also be thrilled to hire somebody else to run it. It's a really hard job, as you know.
Tell me about the company. So we didn't give the name, but so what's the name of the company? What's the elevator pitch? Or I don't have to put you on the spot for that, but what is the product that you guys are doing, and help us understand that?
No, I just was laughing because I realized like this audience in particular is going to find this name really funny. So the name of the company is Groupthink, groupthink.com. If anybody has used Slack, it's kind of the same tongue-in-cheek idea with the naming. But we're building a kind of next generation video conferencing experience. So for these calls that we're having, we're ultimately building a Zoom competitor. We do live transcription and summarization of the conversation. We have live generated slides. We send meeting summaries to all the participants, and we detect things like when you say, I'm going to do X, we actually create to-do items. So, you know, you can now write checks with your mouth for how you're going to spend your time. So the idea is, how could we just do this? This thing we do when we get on these video calls in business is a very uniquely human thing. A lot of the other stuff we do can be automated, but this part, it's really hard to automate. Even just choosing the next question to ask to take the conversation in a particular direction, Elon, it's like you've got 10 different possible futures laid out in front of you, and you're picking each time, which one are we going to go down? That's really valuable, and only humans can really curate those things. So we're thinking about how a lot of other collaboration can become more automated and kind of have like a business Jarvis. We really want to do this in virtual reality, by the way. We're thinking a lot about VR headsets and how we might like all be sitting next to each other manipulating screens. So, you know, an Excel spreadsheet or a coding environment or slide deck or designs or other things. So yeah, we really want to build that cybernetic collaboration where you really feel like the computer and the screen disappear and you're really with these other people who are far away.
You mentioned the aspects of it detects to-dos and it gives summaries. I imagine that that's an AI aspect of the product. And so is AI a big driver for this venture?
Yeah, AI is definitely very exciting right now. I've been building with machine learning for several companies now, but the tools that have come out in the past year and change are just so much easier to use and so much more powerful. So it's open AI, but there's other things as well. You know, I think we probably won't be considered an AI company. We're just AI enabled, but we definitely think to ourselves, what can we do with this? Because we've wanted to do some of these things for a long time and they were just time intensive or expensive. So yeah, the enabling technology, we actually started, this company started as something else and pivoted also. It seems to be what I do. But yeah, this enabling technology with LLMs it's incredible. And we're extracting so much more value out of the spoken time people spend together that I think people don't even really realize they're creating. So very excited about it.
Can you just tell us as just a brief comment, what did the company start out planning to do, and given the way where you are now?
Yeah, so when we started, it was August 2021. So kind of top of the ZERP market. We got a bunch of funding because we had a prototype for building a Google Analytics competitor that would let you take all of that data and own it within your company instead of giving it to third parties. It's called first party. We still have the IP, but basically we raised a second round of funding and we shook on it the day before the war in Ukraine started. And after that war started, the entire ecosystem for tech has changed. And we found that teams are, as you've probably noticed, having a lot of layoffs. And analytics software is sold to the marketing organization. So not really the thing they want to be buying when they're deciding what headcount to cut. So we pretty much realized we had a market change where we could keep trying to fight the uphill battle, but we didn't have enough of that, like, it's flying off the shelves dynamic to make it make sense. And we had a lot of money left. So we decided, oh, wow, this OpenAI we got an early access actually to OpenAI because the former CEO is a Y Combinator person. So we had been playing with it. And we were like, okay, this is where everything's going. Let's just go here. Like, this is going to be so fun to build. We're so burned out on this other thing. We don't really know what's going to happen with all these wars that are and different international stuff that's going on that's changing the financial market. But at least if we go build something really fun, we'll be motivated. Mm-hmm. That's honestly the logic. It's not always about making a lot of, like, you can only really make a lot of money if you find something really awesome. So and finding something really awesome, you can't always start out with a plan to make a lot of money. Sometimes you just have to play. Mm-hmm. So we played with a bunch of different ideas. And that's how we ended up where we are. But like through many, I mean, it would take me hours to explain the iterations of that. But yeah, we started out with a chatbot, and then OpenAI launched a chatbot that does the same thing. We were like, well, we're not going to compete with them because we don't have $100 million. What else can we do? And we're like, oh, we can make this chatbot collaborative. And then where would you collaborate? Oh, we didn't have chat in Zoom. We'd all maybe be in Slack or some chat room as the back channel. So you can just kind of see how you naturally kind of go down.
I see a couple of questions coming up. Let's hold off on those, and we're going to go into the breakout rooms in just a moment. I wanted to pull some of the threads together and ask you a bit about something that we were talking about this right before the event began, and I remarked that it was easy to research you because you're very online, which is really good for me. And it was fascinating because I don't just mean that you're on a lot of social media, which you are, and you have a big following, and I think it's because of your place in the industry and the connections you made. But the other thing I noticed is that you are very open about different personal things that other people might not want to share online, but you do. And I think my understanding is it's a deliberate choice. It's not just you're one of these people who can't filter. It's like you choose to share a lot. And I wanted to ask you a bit about that, and in connection with your agreeing to be here and to share sort of your journey with experiencing Ayn Rand's work and its inspiration to you. Tell us a bit about why you're so online and how that fits with your values and so forth.
Yeah, so when I went to that Objectivism conference in 2004, there are all these people, giving talks. And I thought to myself, maybe I should, I was 19, maybe I should go back to college and I should become a academic, and I should become a better writer, and I should become an expert. I think Greg Salmieri, and it was like the same age. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's amazing. Maybe I could be that smart, things like that. And I think you have this question when you find good ideas of how do you share them? And, there's also activism. But for me, I already was pretty deep into knowing I wanted to be a builder of businesses and a business person. And I think in a way, this is sort of my form of activism. And I don't talk about objectivism a lot. I found pretty quickly that just got me into like all these flame wars online that were very distracting for me. But I do think there's something about just like living your life and finding things that work and then sharing them. It's kind of part of the teaching mindset, I think, where like if people are already following me because I'm the CEO of this company, how can I add some value to that? I've already got this platform. What can I put out for the world? And I think, mimesis is very powerful. I think, offering a story of a life and a picture of a life that people want is a way to help people kind of chart their own course. And I was looking for that when I started out on my journey. I think also I have changed over time. Maybe I was a big oversharer, but I think it was part of kind of hacker culture to some extent. And then I realized all the positive things. So like, I do get some weird things. I do get some internet stalkers. It's not like the bad stuff isn't out there. I'm not pretending it's not, but the upside is worth it. the upside of connecting with people and feeling like I'm part of a global community that's not about, you know, boundaries of country or language. It's just about people who want to do cool stuff with their life. I feel really lucky. So, you know, I have about 80,000 Twitter followers. That's the main platform where I engage with people. And my discourse is so civil and engaged and interesting. It's about making things and it's about the future. And I just want to say that to this audience who, you know, maybe you go online and you think, why be on social media? It seems like there's just all this yucky stuff. But like there are parts of social media, these communities that we build as individuals that I think they do make a difference. And I think the Objectivist conferences are another great example of like a community, and why Combinator is a community. And like when you're inside those communities, it's different. I mean, as you all know, and I feel like I'm doing my own part to build my own little commons.
Mhm. I appreciate that. And one of the things we've been thinking about a lot since these roundtables began during COVID, and we had an idea of bringing people together before COVID, and then COVID happened. We realized, wow, this is the time. Let's connect with our community. And the way I thought of it was we want to enable people wherever they are, because we have people today even from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and to help foster a community of common value. And that's just such a powerful thing. I see it. We meet here every month. We have the in-person events as well, but just I agree with that. I think it's a really powerful thing, and I appreciate your sharing. I happen to follow something you tweeted the other day about Sam Altman and the whole OpenAI thing. It was really interesting because it was just an offhand comment about, oh, this is an Atlas Shrugged thing. If you don't think Atlas Shrugged is a, and I know that that's not the big part of what you do, but it was striking to me because it was a really offhand thing that it wasn't, you were sensitive about it. This is something that matters to me, and and it was a really interesting observation too, which I hadn't thought about myself. So I was sort of piecing together, oh, that's what she's talking about. So thanks for doing that. I think that's an important thing. And some of the guests we've had in the past have said things that not the same, but they're similar in spirit, in that I'm just thinking about one of the guests we had recently who said that his approach in engaging with colleagues, he was in academia and in the military, and his approach was, look, I'm going to do the best thing I know how to do in my job. I'm going to be a model of the values I care about, and that's going to be a beacon for people. And they come and ask me, and I'll tell them. And because in his context, it was much more difficult to talk about his ideas in the military. There's a whole structure, and anyway, but this whole idea of living the things you care about and then connecting with people over that, I think it's just very powerful. So I appreciate your sharing that part of your life.
I guess, can I add one other thing?
Yeah,
That's relevant
for sure.
to this audience about this. When I first got into Objectivism, I met a lot of people who were frustrated in the movement. And like now I know that that's always going to be the case, you know, but I think that life is really long. So I've been thinking a lot, you know, how do I keep myself motivated in business, but also how do you keep yourself motivated for all the things that matter to you? And I think sometimes if you only identify with like one piece of yourself, you know, if I went out and I was crusading for just Objectivism, then I'd be a lightning rod for all the drama that goes with debating these ideas. And that's actually, I think, one of the decisions that you make when you decide what kind of activism to do is like, what kind of conversations do you want to be in every day? So for anybody else who's maybe thinking about this for themselves on this call, I think it's really important to manage your own motivation, because I want to be still talking about these ideas and building this community and helping people in 50 years. And I think that's what I'm doing for me is really sustainable, but I think it's a very personal choice.
Yeah.
So I think there's no wrong choice. There's lots of ways to do this that are all great. And I'm grateful for all the people who do things in different ways. I think when I was younger, I thought, you know, I would look at the like objectivist intellectuals and I was like, that's the thing to be. And I still think it's extremely important. And I'm so grateful it exists. But I think that even if you're not doing that, that doesn't mean you can't do other really great things. And I think it took me a while to kind of figure out my place.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad for there being people like you, people who are building and creating and innovating. And some of the other guests we've had are in different fields. They're scholars, they're scientists, they're researchers. It's just wonderful to see people building in their own fields. I want to draw a line here. As much as I want to talk with you more, I want to leave some time for the breakout rooms, which we're going to open momentarily. Looks like most people are back. This is great. Thanks for staying with us. I was in the room with Ellie listening to her ask more questions. I wish we had more time for those. I apologize. We had to cut you guys short a few minutes. I would like to wrap up the event and thank you all for being here, being supporters of the Ayn Rand Institute, helping us bring Ayn Rand's works and her ideas to more people, inspiring more doers and more creators. And that is what we're here for. We wake up every morning to do that work. We do it at scale. We do it in a way that I think no one else has ever thought possible. And we're really proud of the work we're doing. And for that, we thank you for making it possible. We never lose sight of the fact that you guys, your commitment to our mission is what keeps us moving forward. And I hope you find the event today to be inspiring and that you see some of the work that Ayn Rand's ideas have on their own and that we're trying to accelerate them into the culture. So thanks for being part of what we do at the Ayn Rand Institute. What I'd like to do to close the event is to bring Ellie back and ask her for some closing remarks and reflections. And I'm going to leave it to you, Ellie, to share what you'd like to bring up. And sometimes we have quotations, sometimes not, but I just want to bring you back up and give you the opportunity to share some reflections on today or just your experience in general.
Sure, thank you. This was amazing. So it's funny, at the beginning of our call, you mentioned, that I would have a chance to share here, and I'm just going to go with what flashed to my mind at that time. I didn't do any prep for this besides, noodling on it more, but what flashed to my mind was, that first time I read Atlas Shrugged, I was really young. I had no, work experience beyond these like very menial jobs. And there's a scene you're all going to remember where I think Dagny is like just exhausted. I mean, there's many scenes actually where the characters are exhausted. And I thought I knew at 19 like what that felt like. And it turned out there was a lot further to go with how tired you can get or how demoralized you can get or how hard things can be. And I've certainly lived that moment, on a much deeper level since. And it's amazing how we walk around in the world and we don't see those moments. Those are such private moments. And it's amazing, really, that we got a window into that experience in that story, because we probably won't ever see that moment. Even with someone we like fall asleep next to, we might never be there for their moment. And I guess as I've, done things in business that have been successful, I love to talk about the success stories, but I've also cultivated a lot more respect for the dark side of it, the hard part. And I think there's something about like being hopeful, but also having a really good appreciation for when it's hard. Like, I'm sure you've all had that moment. And like, in a way, we're carrying that around. And like, that's part of why it's so good to celebrate the things that work, because like that makes it worth it. And I think when we collaborate with people, I always try to hold in mind that like, they probably aren't going to call me when that happens. But like, if I could create something that they would think of at that moment, that would be incredible. Kind of the way that reading a story that reflects back your own lived experience can kind of make you feel a little bit less alone. So I think when we collaborate with people, we always hope for the best outcomes. We bring our best selves and we smile and we do these meetings and we kind of run the scripted professional way of being. But like, I've definitely thought of people I've worked with in those moments. And I think we each have such an opportunity to kind of be the touchstone. So my hope as we like talk about being doers is that the doing itself, like the making and the way we show up, is a product, of its own value. Like, and we'll never get paid for that part, but I think you can kind of live in other people's minds the way authors do without having to write an 800-something page book. So I hope for each of you that, you are that person for one or two other folks that have collaborated with you. And I aspire to that myself. So that's, I think, my fundamental motivation as a leader and a doer. Just wanted to share that.
You. There's a lot to think about. That's really powerful. I appreciate you bringing that forward to us and for spending part of your Saturday telling us about your life and your experiences. It's been, I was excited to do this. We were going to do this in October and so we had to reschedule. I'm really glad we were able to reschedule. Thank you for making the time and for being so open with us about your life and experiences. It's been, I had high hopes and they've been exceeded. I'm really glad. I hope we cross paths again soon. And thank you for sharing with us and for being part of what we do here, Elle Morrill. And for everybody
Okay.
else, thank you for being part of today's event. We're going to switch now. I'm going to sign off. I don't know if you're going to be able to stay, Ellie, but we don't, wasn't
I'll hang
planned. Oh, okay, great. So for those of you who want to stay, as we do at our in-person events, you're welcome to stay in the room and connect with each other. And it sounds like Ellie's going to stay for a while. And I will see you all next time. Thanks for being here, and goodbye.